Got 99 problems, but worrying about the Falcons' loss to the Saints ain't one.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is sponsored by Ultimate GM. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL in all caps inside the game store to receive a free boost to your franchise. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Sirius Black, aka the Jolly Green Giant, aka Mr. aka, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen or first watch each and every day. And to become an everydayer, all you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today is a worry-free Monday for me, where, I'll talk all about why I'm not that worried about some of the things that we saw on Sunday in week 10 in that loss to the New Orleans Saints. And, obviously recording this more than 24 hours after the end of that game, we've seen a lot of what I would deem overreaction, in my humble opinion, to week 10's loss to the New Orleans Saints. But I sort of look at it big picture, having rewatched the film on Monday morning. And it kind of reiterated some of the things that I observed watching the game live on Sunday. But, I think the Falcons, for the most part, played a winning type of game, right? They did a lot of things that they wanted to do in this game, right? They ran the ball particularly well in this game. The passing game was explosive in this one. So you check the two boxes in sort of both phases on offense, and you basically checked those similar boxes on defense, right? You stopped the run pretty effectively after the Saints opening drive. You were able to apply effective pressure on the quarterback in this game. Now, I know PFF and Next Gen Stats, put the Falcons only pressuring Carr on less than a third of his dropbacks. Having charted the game now, I think that number is closer to about half of his dropbacks. So to me, that's pretty effective pressure. So you check 4 out of the 5 boxes that you wanted to check. That fifth box being special teams, you didn't check. We'll talk more on that later. And, that was a contributing factor to why you didn't win this game. But I don't think any of this is things that people should get too bent out of shape for, right? The Falcons won a game. Like, essentially what I'm saying is the Falcons outplayed the Saints and lost. And, you can make the case pretty easily that the Falcons have been on the opposite end of one such game where they won a game that they probably should have lost, at least one game this year, going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. And sometimes that happens in the NFL. The ball doesn't necessarily bounce your way. And so if I'm Raheem Morris, I'm looking at this team and I'm like, look, we don't have to change anything that we're doing. We just got to be a little bit better on the details, a little bit fine-tuning our execution, just 5% better, and we'll be okay. But since it is the Saints, I understand that nothing feels worse than losing to the Saints, just like nothing feels better than beating the Saints. And so that, to me, is the emotional side of things, understandably. But I would say, especially for those of you that are still bothered by, whenever you're watching or listening to this on Monday evening or Tuesday morning or whenever, that if you're still feeling the emotional side of things, like, you got, at some point, the logic's got to sort of kick in. And I think the logic is going to tell you that the Falcons are in a good spot. As bad as it feels emotionally, logically, the Falcons are doing fine, right? They should be in a position, regardless of what happens this Sunday against the Broncos, that they'll either be 6-5 or 7-4 going into their bye week. We talked about this back in September, that 6-5 or better was where you wanted this team to be heading into their bye week, in firm control of their destiny. And that's something that we haven't really seen from this football team in the last 6 or 7 years, where they've been at this point in the season and been in firm control of their destiny. So unfortunately, they're not going to sweep the division. Right. I don't think it's the end of the world that they're not going to sweep the division. They've never swept the division in over 20 years of that. So, logically speaking, probably should not have expected it. That, they were going to lose one of these games at some point. But, obviously, because of how the season started, it felt like they, if there's a chance to sweep division, this is our best chance. And so, they still have a chance to go 5-1 if they can take care of business in week 18 against the Carolina Panthers. Hopefully they do. Right. As we say with the Falcons, I'll never put anything past the Atlanta Falcons. But, between now and then, they got 6 games to go. If they go 3-3 over those next 6 games, they should be fine, right? Be in a position to win that Week 18 game and get their 10th win of the season, and hopefully they'll be better than 3-3 over the next 6 games. But I think these next 6 weeks are going to really give us a full measure of this football team, right? You got 4 games remaining in that 6-game span against teams that, if the season were to end today or tomorrow or whenever, would be playoff teams. And 3 of them you have to go on the road for, against Denver on the road, Vikings on the road, Washington on the road, and home against the Chargers. And so we'll get a much fuller measure of this football team in over these next 6 weeks to see really where this team kind of measures up with other quality teams, right? Are they better than some of these other teams? Are they worse than some of these other teams? Are they the same? We'll find out. So I do understand it is a bitter pill to swallow, losing to the New Orleans Saints, right? But I wouldn't get too caught up in this loss. Again, the Falcons checked 4 out of the 5 boxes that they wanted to check in this game. The running game and the passing game on both sides of the ball. That 5th box, again, being that special teams, which they did not check that box. And that's probably the big factor in why they lost this game. But again, I'm not overreacting to it. I'm not overreacting to one bad game. And I emphasize one bad game from Younghoe Koo. And we'll get into all of that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Hey, Falcon fans, remember our great partner, Ultimate Pro Football GM? Well, they're back and they have added an amazing new game mode. Not only can you get your Terry Fontenot on as a GM and lead your team to glory, it now has a new head coach career mode. So on top of being able to build your dynasty by drafting players, signing free agents, hiring coaches, you also get to call offensive plays. Ultimate Pro Football GM is completely free with no ads and is 100% playable offline. And you can play on the go as you want, when you want. And here's a special offer for our Locked On fans. Use the promo code Locked On NFL, all caps, one word, inside the game store, and you'll receive a free boost to your franchise. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. Ultimate Pro Football GM. Start your dynasty today. And get ready to tackle NFL action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can go check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Maybe that first $5 bet will be on the Atlanta Falcons in their matchup against the Denver Broncos in Week 11, where the Falcons are 1.5-point road underdogs facing the Denver Broncos. So check it out at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So, this week is going to be a week where Younghoe Koo is going to get scrutinized. You'll see people talking about kicker mechanics, all out of their depth, over analyzing things that they don't really know what they're talking about, which is fine. But my suggestion to many of those of you that might find yourself over analyzing, Younghoe Koo's kicking mechanics or whatever issue involving Younghoe Koo, don't overthink it. Turn off your brains. Don't overthink it. I don't think the Falcons or you should be worried about Younghoe Koo, right? I feel like he's earned the benefit of the doubt to kick his way through this slump. If he does, great. If he doesn't, then we'll circle back in the offseason. Now, I know a lot of people have sort of suggested over the last 24 hours that, not addressing their kicking woes or whatever you want to call them is, quote unquote loser mentality. I've seen that term thrown around a bunch. It's sort of anything, sort of the suggestion that the Falcons are being complacent if they're not trying to upgrade this position. And I just think that's kind of a ridiculous statement. To me, Younghoe Koo has been one of the NFL's best kickers for the last 5 years. And he's going through a mild slump. And I don't feel like we need to, over exaggerate what's going on. Now, again, I'm sure many of you will push back and say, well, it's not mild because you insert certain stats that you cherry picked in order to, push a narrative of how poorly Younghoe Koo it is. But it is a mild slump. As I explained on yesterday's episode, Koo is basically 2 kicks under expectation. That if you look at where Koo has been historically throughout his NFL career, he's basically missed 2 more field goals than he should. Two. That's it, right? And, for those of you that missed yesterday's episode, I'll reiterate what I explained on yesterday's episode. You just look at it sort of where he's kicking from range, right? You can't just sort of look at the overall number and say, oh, that's bad. You got to understand, longer kicks are harder to make. So if you're kicking more longer kicks, there's a reason for that. But you look at the 50-plus range, right? Koo is currently 5 of 8 from 50-plus. his career average and roughly the NFL average is around 74%, from that same range. So that would basically be a normal Younghoe Koo would be 6 of 8 from 50 plus yards. And so that one more miss that he's had is basically explained as the block kick he had a couple of weeks ago against Tampa Bay from that range, right? You look at the range from under 40, right? Koo is 9 of 10. His career average hitting from under 40 is 98%. So theoretically, he should be 10 of 10 at this point in time. So that one miss, again, was the block field goal that we saw on yesterday from under 40 yards, from 35 yards out. And so really the area of concern for Younghoe Koo is that 40 to 49 yard range, right? Because again, the two blocks are really explaining everything over 50, everything under 40, right? So the 40 of 49 range where Koo is 3 of 6, right? His career average is 80%. So roughly, let's say that's 5 of 6. He would be 5 of 6 from that range. So that's 2 under expectation. And as I said on yesterday's episode, one of those that he missed yesterday from the 40 to 49 yard range basically was 6 inches too far to the right and hit off the upright and didn't go in. If he hits that, 6 inches to the left, boom. So again, like I'm sitting here not feeling this sort of pressure that other people seem to be feeling, looking just simply at the numbers, but trying to contextualize this. And I don't feel like Younghoe Koo is having some terrible issues, right? He's missed 2 kicks that he probably should have made. That's about it. He's had 2 kicks blocked, but like no one's talking about the block kicks and how much blocked kicks has been an issue for the Falcons this year, right? Prior to this year, in the 5 years that he played in Atlanta, Koo had 1 of 168 field goals blocked, 1 of 145 extra points blocked, right? He's had 2 of 24 field goals blocked this year and none of 23. But you do the math and you just factor in all the field goals and PAT, all the blocked opportunities that he has had. His field goals have been and his kicks have been almost 7 times more likely to get blocked this year than they had been in the 5 years previous combined. Now, that to me seems to be a bigger issue than Younghoe Koo dealing with whatever slump issues that he's going to deal with. So, do I have a solution to solving the blocked field goal? No, that's Marquise Williams, as the special teams coordinator's pay grade, and he'll have to figure that out. And, I'm not going to do too much weighing in on how he figured it out. Just hopefully the job gets done. So, if it continues to be an issue, whether we're talking about the block kicks, Younghoe Koo missing, some field goals that he should make, then I'll say it'll be a concern, but probably not a concern for me until we get to the offseason, right? And again, I know there's going to be some pushback from folks being like, that's not good enough. We know we need to be much more concerned about, his potential kicking erraticism is going to potentially cost his team games. Well, if it does, then we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But I think a lot of the criticisms that I've seen directed towards his team over the last week or so have been sort of criticisms that seem to be caveated with the idea of like, this is a flaw that could get exploited if and when we get to January and play in the playoffs. And as I said, like that's a bridge we'll cross if and when we get to it, but I'll further break down why I'm not as concerned with other people as other people are with, playoff problems as opposed to the sort of week to week that we get into. And we'll do that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Guys, basketball season is here, and it is time to get back into the arena with Game Time. And as you smoke on your cigarettes and eat your crepe Suzette to get back into State Farm Arena so that you can watch Zachary Risa-Shea, make sure you take advantage of the Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks. Is going to make getting tickets to see your favorite Frenchman even easier, right? Game Time Picks is going to filter out all the fluff so you can only see incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And the other great things that we love about Game Time is those panoramic seat views, so you know exactly what you're getting. What you see is what you get. What you see is what you get when it comes to toggling the all-in prices feature on in the app, so you don't have to worry about hidden fees at checkout. So whether it's basketball, football, other sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is near you, Game Time is taking the guesswork out of buying tickets. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. So I'm going to put on, imagine my bald head wearing a little hat that says therapist on it, right? I feel like an amateur psychologist, amateur therapist, having interacted with Falcon fans for, a quarter century plus. I tend to feel like I have a very good grasp on how the fan mindset works, right? And I think for one of the things, going back to the point I made earlier, where I think a lot of people's criticisms around the team going back to last week in the Falcons sort of standing pat at the trade deadline, or, this so-called loser mentality of like, we're not trying to replace Younghoe Koo, immediately after one bad game. I feel like trying to wrap my head around that sort of perspective, right? I feel like there's a Venn diagram, right? And the people that still haven't gotten over that Super Bowl loss from 7 years ago, there's a lot of overlap with the people that are sort of making similar comments to that, of being very concerned about how deep a playoff push this team can make. Because I think for a lot of those folks, as I mentioned earlier, this is the first opportunity where the Falcons are really in control of their playoff destiny at this point. This is the first time in 7 years that they've been in that. And so to a lot of folks, it feels like there's a ticking clock where this team has to maximize this window in order to, redeem that Super Bowl loss. I can only give you my perspective on this, but there's not a part of me that's concerned about that. And the reason for that is because I'm taking more of a long-term, big picture view rather than being worried about redeeming a football game that happened 7 years ago. Right. As I said at the beginning of last offseason, the 2023 offseason, the Falcons are entering phase 2 of their rebuild, right? Where they can really start to rebuild in earnest, right? Phase 1 was those first couple of years under Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot, where really the goal was just tread water, be competitive as you possibly can, making lemonade out of lemons. It was really at the beginning of the 2023 offseason when the Falcons had spending room, right? Had added a number of young, skilled players, where it really felt like they were beginning their rebuild in earnest. They were entering phase 2 of that. Now, since then, they've signed some free agents that offseason. They've made a couple of draft picks. Obviously, they brought in Kirk Cousins and Darnell Mooney this past offseason. And I think the perception from a lot of folks is like the Falcons have finished their rebuild. They're ready to go. They're ready to compete right now. And I don't have that perspective, right? They're still, to me, in phase 2. Now, they're not at the beginning of phase 2, but, they're a couple of steps into phase 2, but we haven't reached phase 3 yet, to me, which is the final phase of that rebuild. And again, what exactly phase 3 is, is kind of nebulous, but it's basically the point when you reach where you're fully formed as a true contender, where teams, you can go into a season expecting, no, it's Super Bowl or bust for us, right? That's how good a football team, or we are good enough to win a Super Bowl. And the expectation should be that we should win a Super Bowl. The Detroit Lions are a great example of a team that just entered, I think, phase 3 of their rebuild this season, right? It was year 4 of their rebuild with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell starting around the same time. And credit goes to the Lions, right? They pulled off this rebuild as well as you possibly could have hoped, in just 4 years to be in this position. And as I suggested, I think the Falcons are really just in their second year. And so it may take a couple more years for them to get in a similar position as the Detroit Lions if all things go according to plan moving forward, which again is fine. Like I can be patient. Right. In the meantime, I just want the Falcons to win as many football games as they possibly can. And if that means, getting bounced in the first round of the playoffs, and so be it, I can't control that. As I often say, I can only control what I can control. And my hope is that the Falcons continue to be a competitive, good football team. And then in the meantime, as we finish out phase 2 of this rebuild. But, to me, and again, we'll see how it all plays out. But to me, the Falcons really won't hit phase 3 until probably the Michael Penix era starts, and we can definitively say, hey, Michael Penix is a franchise quarterback. That's not to sort of write off Kirk Cousins or anything like that, but it's going to be, to me, hard for the Falcons to kind of wrap that up in this next year or 2 window that they have. But the goal should be, to surround Michael Penix in order to maximize that phase 3 window. So it's not just, hey, let's maximize this Kirk Cousins window in the next year or 2. It's let's maximize the window that we have, with Michael Penix and beyond over the next decade or 2, right? And, you want to surround Michael Penix with that young core of players that the Falcons are in the process of building, right? And have been in the process of adding those pieces. But, when will the Falcons get to that point? Time will tell. We don't know, right? We don't know if Michael Penix is going to be that franchise quarterback. We don't know who's going to be calling plays if and when Michael Penix takes over, right? You don't know how long Zach Robinson is going to be here in Atlanta before he gets plucked as a potential head coach, right? Can the Falcons stabilize their offensive line, right? You have some young pieces on the interior, but you're worried a little bit about the offensive tackle play in the future, long term, right? And so it's very unlikely that Michael Penix is going to be playing behind Caleb McGarry and Jake Matthews for more than a year or so, if and when he takes over. And so you want to be able to find those young offensive tackles that he will be able to play behind for, again, hopefully a decade or more, right? You look at this young group of skill players, right, that are potentially going to be in the primes of their careers over the next, 3 to 5 years, like Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts and Drake London. And those guys are going to have to get paid. And who are those guys that are worthy of getting paid, right? Those are still issues the Falcons have to resolve. And then you look at the defense, right? The defense is basically a full rebuild where they're still adding young pieces, right? You still have, core pieces like AJ Terrell, Jesse Bates, right? And then you're phasing out a bunch of older veterans. And then it's like, who are going to be young pieces that are going to step up to fill those guys? And are they core pieces or are they just kind of stopgaps? Troy Anderson, Arnold Ebiketie, Zach Harrison, et cetera, all this sort of things. So all of this stuff is in flux for the Atlanta Falcons. And so we'll see how they solve and address these issues. But it's part of the reason why I don't necessarily lament the fact that the Falcons didn't pull the trigger at the trade deadline, because to me, adding another Band-Aid is not really the mindset I think this team should be. They should be in the mindset of how do we solve problems and not how do we bandage those. And to me, you're not really going to solve problems until we get to the offseason, right? It's not about band-aiding those situations, right? It's about curing the disease, not necessarily treating the symptoms, if you're following what I'm saying. And so ultimately, that's kind of my quote-unquote beef with Terry Fontenot. And I use air quotes when I say beef because I don't really have a beef with Terry Fontenot. I'm neither pro nor anti-Terry Fontenot. But basically, my issue is that Terry hasn't really solved any of the problems that, the Falcons have had coming in, when he first got here, right? Everything in the last, 3-4 years has been more of a Band-Aid or stopgap solution, right? In terms of what this team is building. So we'll see, if some of these Band-Aids turn into, long-term solutions and whatnot. But this team's long-term success hinges on their ability to solve those problems, right? And giving up a 4th-round pick for Azeez Ojulari to me wasn't solving a problem. Replacing Younghoe Koo or challenging Younghoe Koo or bringing in competition to replace Younghoe Koo or whatever people are talking about, 24 hours after the Saints game, to me is not solving problems. Right now, as we move forward, we'll see what this team is made of. If we're, we're in a good spot is basically what I'm trying to get at. Now, if they lose their next 3 games or whatever, we'll be having a very different conversation on this podcast, but we're not there yet. And I don't think anybody should be overly worried that we're going to get there. And so as you guys do, I hate losing to the Saints, but I'm not that bothered by it. I'm unbothered by it to the certain extent. And so I feel like the Falcons just keep doing what you're doing. They'll be fine, right? Not every game has to be a referendum on this football team and various players and whatnot. So we'll see what adjustments they make, what tweaks they can make, but they just got to continue to be that high-powered offense that they've been more often than not, and that you saw flashes of on Sunday, and we'll hopefully continue to see flashes of, and hopefully they'll be able to not only get the explosive plays to put them in the position to score, but they'll actually score points, right? And they've done that pretty consistently, over the last month and a half of the season, and hopefully they'll continue to do that for the next 2 months of the season. But, the defense needs to also make incremental improvements, which they have over the last couple of weeks. We'll see where they are at if they continue to make incremental improvements over the next, 7 games that are remaining of the season. And we'll see where this team is at year's end. But, can't make any promises where they'll be at that point in time. But we'll take it day by day. That's what we do here on this daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. So tomorrow we'll continue this daily podcast talking about the all 22 from this Saints game. We can talk about why I don't necessarily have any complaints about Kirk Cousins' performance on Sunday. To me, a lot of the issues that the Falcons were dealing with earlier had less to do with, to me, Kirk being off and more just to do with the Falcons receivers not getting enough separation in man coverage against the Saints man coverage. And then we'll talk a little bit defensively, probably about, the Falcons dabbling with some 4-3 looks. Now we'll see how many, if that continues moving forward, especially with the news that Troy Anderson re-aggravated his knee injury. And so what will that mean for him short-term and long-term here in Atlanta. So those are topics that we may get into on tomorrow's episode. So make sure you continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. And of course, check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you check out Locked On NFL for your second listen and get the lowdown going on with the other 31 NFL teams around the NFL with 2 shows daily. One from Tyler Rowland, giving you that shot of NFL espresso first thing in the morning. The other from Tony Wiggins, giving you that real NFL talk by taking it to the barbershop. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every